Okay, some people are just settling down. Lots of space today, being Australia Day, public holiday. A lot of people thought that, it's a public holiday, so the place will be closed today. But we're open 24/7, every day of the year. I think we never close, do we? I don't think so. Should do. Me, I work every day of the year. But today, because it's supposed to be public holiday, today I should get penalty rates. Get paid double? Two cups of tea instead of one? That's all we get anyway. But anyway, it's nice just giving a talk, hanging out with your friends, and just surfing. But the talk today, what it's going to be, is I'm always open for people giving some suggestions. And somebody came in earlier and they said, why don't you talk about, part of Buddhism, the reincarnation, the rebirth, but especially why it is that the characters, go over from one life to another. Your character, is it something totally new you have developed, from your parents, your upbringing, your schooling? Or is there something even more than that, coming from your previous lives, the previous existences? And but first of all, I was really surprised that people even don't agree that such a thing could exist, like previous lives. That people think reincarnation is a myth. And first of all, it was because I was a theoretical physicist, a scientist, still am, still involved in that field, because people thought they couldn't understand it, therefore it can't exist. And people like Carl Sagan kept on saying, extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. But the point was, who decides what an extraordinary claim is and what the level of evidence is? And so just becoming the judge and the jury, as well as setting the laws and the reasons for evidence, was a bit much in my mind. But anyway, it goes against experiences which you have in this life. And it's amazing as a monk, the experiences and the anecdotes which you have amassed over, 43, 44 years of my monastic life. And even beforehand. And I am not a skeptic. So I'm not an easy believer. I'm more skeptical than anything else. Because that was my training in maths and theoretical physics. Never just to believe, but to check it out. But when the evidence is compelling, then you just have no choice but to accept it. And again, the sort of people I used to hang out with, was, and I love mentioning this fellow's name, was Bernard Carr. He was here a couple of years ago for a conference which we held, and Bernard was a very close friend because he was the first Buddhist I ever met. And the story is this. As a young man, we're going to school, and about 16 years of age, I started to come good at the secondary school where I was studying, and I won my first school prize at 16 for maths. So, I asked, what do I do? I never had a school prize before, and my teacher said, you go off to the bookshop and get books on mathematics, so you could go even further in that field. So, being obedient, I went to this bookstore in Charing Cross Road in London, Foyle's bookshop. And I went in there, the mathematics section, and I looked at all these books on mathematics. And I said to myself, I'm not going to waste my first school prize on that rubbish. I want something a bit more interesting. And I noticed on the opposite side of the road, in the annex is always interesting, in the very top floor, the attic, that is where they had books on the weird stuff. Psychic powers. All the different religions were up there as well. And so I bought a whole mass of paperbacks. And the teacher said, you're not supposed to get paperbacks, but it's good value for money instead of getting a hardback, but we've got to present something to you. Well, present that's good enough. So I think the book which was presented to me, I think it was absolutely true, was The Third Eye by Lobsang Rampa. The guy, I think some celebrity or some important person, said, what is this book this guy's getting? But that was only one of them. The rest of them was all these books on Buddhism. That's actually where I became a Buddhist. I read them. I thought, wow, that's what I am. That's how I think. That's my personality. And it was only when I went to university that they had all these clubs and societies, and my eyes went wide when I saw there was a Buddhist club in the university. And I was just so excited. What you mean, there's other Buddhists? I can actually, join something? This was in 1969, I think. And so I went to the counter, and there was another student was on the other end of the counter and said, I want to join. He said, no, this is Buddhism. You don't need to join. Just come and test it out. I said, I'm already a Buddhist. I want to join. No, just after a few talks if you want to. And I slammed a £1 note, which was a joining fee for 1 year, on the table. Join me now. And he became a lifelong friend. That was Bernard Carr. Now, interestingly, he was not just a Buddhist, he was also a theoretical physicist. And I'll say more about that in a moment. He was also into psychic research and astronomy. We the same things. And I, became a Buddhist monk, with a great teacher, Ajahn Brahm, and he did his theoretical physics with an even more famous teacher called Stephen Hawking. He was a very close disciple of Stephen Hawking. Stephen came to his marriage, and also in the biopic called A Brief History of Everything. No, was it? Yeah, but anyway, a biopic of Stephen Hawking. Bernard was actually featured in that. And no, some other actor played him, but because he was featured in it, Bernard got the invitation on the red carpet to the premiere in Leicester Square somewhere. So it's really cool going on the red carpet next to Stephen Hawking. But anyway, he was a very close friend. So this is not some flaky professor. He's actually just professor of theoretical physics at Queen Mary College in University of London. And so he was interested in all this stuff as I was interested in, like reincarnation, rebirth, and psychic phenomena, and Buddhism, and theoretical physics. This is a cutting-edge stuff. And for me, I thought, well, the evidence is out there. Apparently that was X-Files. The truth is out there. And it's absolutely true. This is not flaky stuff. This is hard-nosed scientists were investigating this. And so for me, it's obvious that there's things like reincarnation. There's people I know can remember their past lives. And there's usually three ways of this happens. One is like spontaneous. You just remember. And the best example of that was this fellow called Roy Hudd. You can get him on the internet, R-O-Y, second name H-U-D-D. He was a TV personality when I was growing up in UK. He was always on the TV. Comedian, very funny guy. But his story was that he'd been doing a show in London somewhere at a time when the local government installed a new one-way system, to try and get the traffic to move a bit more clearly or smoothly. And because some usual routes were blocked, he got lost. He was driving around, he got lost, he didn't know the way to get home, getting more and more lost. He turned a corner, and that's when it happened. He had the hairs on the back of his head stood up Now that never happens to a monk because we don't have hairs. But anyway, you would still feel this is weird, this is strange. And he was just so weird, so strange. He'd never been down this street before in this life. But he remembered it from his previous life. And it all flooded back to him. And he went to the house where he'd lived for many, many years before. Now, in those houses and those places in London, they have the little blue circular disc which shows who lived there before. And they're very interesting. The last time I was in London, close to Russell Square, there was a big disc in there, and in this house lived the mistress of Charles II. The mistress! That wasn't very nice, but she was famous enough, they put it on there. So be very careful what you do, because sometimes that if you anyway, back to this. There was a big blue sign outside the house because of his past life. He was also a celebrity, and his past life was as probably the most famous music hall entertainer of his generation. In the times when people would go not to pubs or clubs, it was like the music hall where lots of beer, entertainers. His name was Dan Leno, Leno. And that was a plaque which actually said he recognized that was his house before. And he knocked on the door, and his people opened the door, and you're Roy Hudd. We know you, we see you on the telly. What are you doing here? At which he told them he'd lived here before. You haven't lived here before. We've been living in this house for 30, 40 years. But I was here before you. And because he was well known, recognized, they let him into the house, and he took them all around the house, showing what it was like before. He remembered very clear memories, even where he did his rehearsing in one of those rooms in front of the mirror. So, it was a memory from a very well-known personality. And now he's written books about Dan Leno. Supposed to be historical books, but he has information which you cannot get from any other source, except if you've been there before. And the interesting part of that is, in his previous life, he was a comedian, an entertainer. And in this life, he's a comedian, an entertainer. So sometimes I wonder, because I've been telling jokes before I came in here, what was I before I became a monk in this life? But the characters especially, they carry on from life to life. And that was the interesting part. Because, yes, we do have many lives, but the personality, the character, who you are today is a connection with who you were before. And that is the fascinating part. When you are born into this world, you are not an empty, clean slate. You come with history. And that's when people come and tell me their anecdotes. And I check them out. I just challenge them, as best I possibly can. And it's amazing the anecdotes which you come up with of when a person is born. And one of those best anecdotes from a couple here in Perth. They were not even Buddhist, but they came to see me simply because they thought maybe a Buddhist monk could understand this phenomenal experience they had. They, young man or woman, Caucasian, and they had a young family, and their youngest son had just been born maybe a couple of weeks earlier. And their eldest son was about 3 or 4 years of age. Their new boy was just a couple of weeks. And one evening, just after dinner, they told their eldest son, Peter, say, go and say good night to your baby brother. And so he went, and then so he can go to bed. So the 3 or 4-year-old leant over the little cot, whatever you call it, where the baby brother was laying, and leaned over, and I think the baby brother was named Paul, and leant over and said, good night, Paul. And then Paul replied, good night, Peter. He was only 2 or 3 weeks old. No, 2 or 3 days old, no, weeks old or something, very newly born. You're not supposed to speak when you're only an infant. And the 2 parents, they heard that, and they were stunned, and they stared in disbelief at their 2 children. And they said, without any nudging or prompting, the elder son said once more. This time they were both listening carefully, paying 120% attention. Good night, Paul. And Paul said once more, good night, Peter. They heard it, and they were just so stunned. The next day they came to see the Buddhist monk. And you know, one of the interesting things they said was that when he said good night, Peter, it wasn't in baby speak. You know, when your kid starts to speak, there's a little way they speak. This was like an adult speaking. And that was weird. They knew that this kid had come with history. They could speak at such an early age, and then couldn't speak for a couple of years until they started getting their normal language back again. So, and even another couple who were Buddhists, who were in England, they were in Southampton, just walking down the street with their baby or their young child. I don't know when it is when a kid can first speak. But they saw one of the Buddhist monks from the Chithurst monastery. And you know what the baby said? It was the first word the baby ever said. Bhikkhu. Very clear, which is the Pali word for a Buddhist monk. Where did he get that idea from? The first word, bhikkhu. But the most interesting first words spoken, and it was as in an article, it was authentic, was when a child was born in, I think it was in a Californian sort of hospital, in the maternity ward. And the person doing the delivery, I don't think it was a doctor, it was a midwife and obstetrician or whatever, but anyway, they all heard it, and they couldn't believe what they heard. Because as a baby came out of the womb, still attached to the umbilical cord, that little kid, only maybe 10, 15 minutes out of the womb, whatever it is, looked around and spoke clear words. And the words it spoke were, "Oh no, not again." And apparently that was true. He said that. Weird, but true. And how can that? Oh, people are just imagining it. Oh, it can't be true. And that is called denial. The reason I mention this with Bernard Carr, because he told me all of the battle he has with other scientists, trying to impress upon them these things are happening. They are real. They're evidence-based. People actually see this. But the trouble is, when it's something you don't want to see, you blot it out. And that brings me to that experiment which he told me, which is, I've got the reference for it somewhere, but it was a brilliant experiment which Bernard was involved in. It was one of his friends who thought this up. One of his friends, also a top physicist, decided that he was going to do a public demonstration of levitation against all known laws of gravity. And he performed this demonstration in the Imperial College in London. He had a lecture hall, and in front of some of his friends, some of the best physicists, scientists, these were trained experimental observers, people who spent their whole lives doing experiments and seeing what was there and recording it. Objective reality. And to help, they also had cameras videoing everything which happened to try and make sure that there was no trickery, and if there was anything happening, it would be recorded for posterity. And so, the main experimenter walked into the lecture hall holding a flower pot. And he placed the flower pot on the bench. No wires anywhere. And the experiment was about to begin. And he asked everybody, I need your help. What I want you to do to create the atmosphere, the ambience that levitation can occur, I need some chanting. I want you all to chant Om, Om. And it was an amazing achievement that this demonstrator, this scientist, had all these famous crusty old professors to go chanting Om, Om, Om. If you try and do that at the University of Western Australia, they'll think you're crazy, but he managed to pull it off. They were all chanting Om, 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 Om. And that's when the flower pot rose into the air. It actually levitated. They filmed it. They saw it. It levitated. And afterwards, they interviewed a couple of those professors. What do you think of that? We proved levitation. It rose in the air. Some of these professors, they said, what are you talking about? It remained on the table all the time. It never moved. But look at the evidence. We got it photographed. We got it videoed. What are you talking about? That's all been photoshopped. That's been doctored. I was there. I saw it. It never left the table. It did leave the table. But it was so far against what they thought was possible, they denied it. Not consciously, but subconsciously. It never even arrived at their conscious awareness. It was blocked way before. So much for objective reality. What you perceive is already been bent before you're aware of it. Now, let's go back a little bit, because it was a trick. Underneath that bench was a huge, powerful electromagnet. And when they turned the electromagnet on to levitate the flower pot, very strong electric currents always have a hum to them. So in order to mask the hum of turning on a very strong ampage of current, they had all the professors go Om, 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 Om. So they didn't notice the electricity turned on. Otherwise they'd have been busted. They'd seen straight away it was a trick. But it wasn't the point of the experiment, to trick people. It was just to show that even though it levitated, many people didn't see it. And that is always a problem. With anything strange, convincing people it is happening, it's real. That's one of the reasons why those two people, they came to see me to tell me about their kid speaking, because no one else would believe us. I said, but it was real. We were there, we saw it, but no one would believe us. That is a problem with convincing people of truths which are real, which happen, but if they don't happen right in front of you, even if it happens in front of you, you will deny it. No, it can't be right. And that's one of the problems these days. The evidence is so strong. People who recall their past lives. And if one person can, why not everybody? And it also explains a lot about the characters and inclinations which you have from the past to the present. And a lot of times, though, people, they want to suppress that, because if you do remember your past lives and who you were before and where you were and who did what in a past life and how you meet them again in this life, it does create many difficulties and problems. For example, there is one, she's not here today, thank goodness, one Thai lady who was in the northeast of Thailand, and she grew up in this little village. But after she grew up, after a few years, she remembered her previous life and who she was, and her son from her previous life did very well in life. He was son from a previous life, became, managed to do well at school and passed the exams and went to university and became a teacher, and then the head teacher, the headmaster of the local village school. And her memories of personal details and things which happened were just so accurate that everybody in the village realized that this girl was the headmaster's mother in her previous life. Everybody accepted that. And that's where the problem started. Because she had to go to school at 5 or 6 years of age. In the school where the headmaster acknowledged that that was my mum in a previous life. In those schools, when the teacher gets in the room, everybody stands up out of respect. Especially the head teacher, everyone has to stand up. Not her. I'm not standing up for my son. He should stand up for me, said the 5-year-old girl to the 40-year-old headmaster. Or roughly like that. And of course, if you disrespected the teachers in those days, in those schools, you get punished, you get the cane. But this was my mother. I can't cane my mother. So the headmaster just could not discipline that girl because that was my mum. And so she said to me that throughout the whole years at school, she could do whatever she wanted and she could never be punished. She never learned very much, but she had a good time. So sometimes it's best not to know, who was who in your previous life. But the characters, actually, they do tend to actually to go on from life to life. And that is why we've done lots in Buddhism, lots of development in mindfulness-based therapies. Mindfulness is a big thing in today's world. It's used in so many places, to really help solve many social, emotional, and other problems, even physical problems, even health problems. But another part of Buddhism is also starting to emerge, where you take people into their past lives, the hypnotic regressions, where through hypnosis people are taken back. And a lot of time it's people who have little difficulties, problems, to see if they can relate that problem to what happened to them in their previous lives. And many people do this, and many people, whether it was a previous life or not, because sometimes, just like that scientist, it goes so much against who they think, what they think this world is all about, goes so much against that, but nevertheless, it works. They go back and they do actually find that the problem is solved. And that because it's solving problems which people don't solve in other ways. That is why people keep going back and seeing whether they can solve personal, physical, other problems through regression therapy. And as that gets more accepted, because the evidence shows it works, more and more people will start to find that it is based on something much more than fantasy, that was you in a previous life. It explains very much. Things like the weird stuff like love at first sight. Why two people come together. The most extreme case of that were these two people who came on a retreat at Jhana Grove some years ago. I'm teaching a retreat at Jhana Grove now, just come off for the Friday, and then we'll just go back after this talk is complete to carry on the retreat until Sunday. And these two were there, and this is supposed to be a meditation retreat. Many of you have done the meditation retreats. You're not really supposed to hang out, with people of the opposite gender. Keep apart. Keeping 8 precepts, it's called. And this couple would just say couldn't keep their hands off one another. What's going on? And then they came and told me the reason why. And they said it was about a year earlier. I think it was in Germany somewhere, that this girl, who he now married, came up to him. He'd never seen her before in this life, and said to him, just out of the blue, your name is, I think, David, I forget his surname, and I'm going to marry you. And they was, how do you know my name? And if someone came up to you and said that, your name is Chi Wei Sia, and I'm going to marry you. So I'm already married. That would really freak you out. But he couldn't run away, because, this was a bond which was there right from the very beginning. He said, how do you know that? How do you know my name? Did someone tell you? He said, no, I just know. Never seen you before, never checked you out. Never seen you on Facebook, I suppose people say that. No, she just knew his name. And of course, he couldn't refuse her. And even though they come on retreats, and not even I can keep them apart, I give in to karma. more powerful than my rules. And I accepted that. They said, well, let's try your best. But they said, look, the bond is so fast. It can only be from previous lives, what happened before. And that comes on to a personal anecdote. Well, not personal, but personal, my family. Because this was in the history of my family in London. My mother she called her a sister, but it was really a first cousin. But because it was only my grandma, maternal grandma, only had one daughter, and my maternal grandma's sister only had one daughter in London, they grew up as sisters together, hung out together, partied together. They went to dances together. And just after the Second World War, they went to a medium, a spiritualist. And just for fun, just to see what would happen, who knows, something to do. And so this medium took one look at my mother's first cousin, Opal her name is, and looked at her and said to her, straight out of the blue, you're going to meet your husband next week. Okay, you can accept that. His name is Donald Wolfries. Donald? That's maybe, a name which is not that's as common. But Wolfries, that's a weird name. And so she said, just a joke, just a myth, just no gobbledygook. I don't believe in that sort of stuff. And I checked it out with her many, many times. She's still alive, Opal. She's getting very old now. I checked it out with her many, many times. Was that true? She said, yeah, it was true. Well, what happened? Well, a week later, I was at a dance. This nice young man came up to me, do you want to dance? Yeah, okay. He said, no, what's your name? Oh, my name's Opal. She said, what's your name? Donald. Uh-oh. Surname? Wolfries. And they were married for 60 years. And he passed away a couple of years ago. And I know that as true, because that's my family. I don't know when my mother doesn't lie to me. If she did, I'd know straight away. Same with what I would do. And just, how can that happen? It's only because the way that sometimes we remember things. Sometimes you know that people have these accidents or something, they die young, they still got that connection, that attachment towards one another. Sometimes they say, okay, we'll see you again. You know, our time together isn't finished yet, and my goodness, it's not finished. Sometimes it is true. I mean, it's a strange thing for an unromantic monk to say, you know, who tells really silly jokes about marriage. You know, they say, love is blind, marriage, an institution for the blind. That's how romantic I get, but you know, that's only a joke. I bless marriages almost every other week. You know, give them a really good go, and it's, you know, it's quite inspiring. But sometimes you ask, why do these two people come together? Sometimes it is because this life is not finished, so you have another go in the next life. And don't ever forget that, because that is really true. Just like, again, this couple is not here, but I went to the funeral of their first child. Their child died tragically. He was actually stillborn. And the reason was because it had an ultrasound 5 days before birth, and everything was normal. And in those 5 days, it somehow turned, and it had cut off the blood supply by constricting the umbilical cord. Died. So, it was a boy, called it Charlie. Let's call it Charlie. And so, because they're a family, they come here regularly, that I did a funeral for them. And it's really quite sweet, because Charlie was like fully formed young baby. They even dressed him up in the tiny little coffin. They put the coffin almost vertical, and they took a family photograph. They put me in it. So Charlie made a family photograph, which was, you know, really quite sweet. And they weren't that grief-stricken because of, you know, the culture of Buddhism. They knew there's a good chance it will come back again. But what I didn't know they did, when I wasn't looking, when the funeral director wasn't looking, spending a bit of private time, the father and the mother, they took out a simple ballpoint pen and drew a line on their dead son's heel. Just a line. She was a healthy young lady. She soon became pregnant again. There was nothing wrong with her, it's just, you know, bad fortune. And when she became pregnant again, this time the doctors, they gave her really, really, you know, full-on care. They didn't want this to happen again. It was just, you know, an accident, fault, just unlucky, bad chance. So she had a healthy birth. And the baby has got a birthmark on its heel, exactly the same place. It was Charlie come back. But little Charlie was now a girl, and would play around in the community hall with the boys, would be what we call a tomboy, associating with the boys, not the girls. Why? Because it was a boy before. Characters. But those characters usually only last for about 5, 6, 7 years, and 7 years of age they just become a girl again. And it's interesting just to make it, you know, because we have a lot of problems now with gender equity. So just to get it quite clear that it's usually the case if somebody is stillborn and it's no real reason. The Buddhism says, well, their karma is not quite enough to get in this time, but maybe the next time they may make it. And I sometimes, to parents who have that problem with a child who's born and then it just unfortunately passes away just either very early or especially just before birth, I say it's a bit of a gross simile, but it's the best I can come up with. It's like you go to the airport and you find your flight is overbooked and you get what we call bumped off the flight. And what happens if the flight is overbooked and you can't make it on that departure? What do? They give you the next available seat and also an upgrade. That's common practice. So Charlie got the next available place in her womb and an upgrade to a girl. And he goes, yes, I like Ajahn Brahm. Upgrade. And the boys get angry at me afterwards. What do you mean upgrade? Boys and girls are just the same. But anyway, the character, for the first few years, I've witnessed this myself, you could see that carrying on. So sometimes, just those characters, what we learn are inclinations. There's no way that Mozart his skill, only 4 years of age, and wrote his first piece of music. No way that could happen. With somebody just 4 years of age to train them and they could play this incredible music. There's no way that, that people have these inclinations. That when I was at Cambridge, because I was pretty smart at maths, but there was one guy way smarter than me. He was a child prodigy. By the time he was 18, he'd already got a degree in mathematics. We had these child prodigies who go to university when they're only 12 or 13, and they just get their degrees so easily. What happens to them afterwards? And seeing one myself, he just plateaued. When he got to that level, he could never get any higher. All he was doing was recollecting how he'd achieved in his previous life, and that was it. He couldn't go any further. How would he have to work in this life to go further? All about the reincarnation. So, a lot of times the characters, the last little story, there was a fellow I knew over in another capital city. His auntie was a very successful business lady, and she was also single, never got married, never had kids, career woman, very successful. But there were two things the auntie hated in life. One of those things was paying taxes, and the other one was religion. She thought religion, they should work for themselves. They shouldn't get any tax breaks. They just get to things too easy. So she hated religion, she hated paying tax. So what happened was, when she died, her nephew was a very good Buddhist, so he only got a tiny bit of the inheritance because she was afraid he'd give it away to the religion. But what happened was that her nephew had a child after her auntie died, and her child, as soon as it was born and all the relations came out, said, "Oh, that looks just like your auntie who passed away." And my goodness, it was. Because, just like many people who remember their past lives, they say, "No, I want to go to my house, that's my mansion, I don't want to live over here, I want to live in my mansion, it's over there." Pointing to the mansion where his auntie used to live before. He didn't inherit much, but he offered the coffee cup. "Daddy, that's my coffee cup, give it to me." Because it was auntie from the previous life. But the most interesting one, he said, was that when they were going down one of the motorways in New South Wales, and there was a big sign about GST, tax, and this little 2 or 3 year old just beginning to be able to speak, Daddy, what does tax mean?" "Oh, darling, tax means that when you get any money, like some pocket money, you will have to give some of that to the government." Trying to explain it to a 2 or 3 year old. And the little girl said, "When I get any money, I'm not giving any of it to the government." Even as a 3-year-old, she had the same characteristic of not wanting to give anything to the government. Characters from life to life. That's why, that we do need that time to develop ourselves, to be kind, to be compassionate, to be wise, to be forgiving. It's not something which we can learn in one life. So that's one of the reasons why Buddhism can be so patient. Sometimes with the people meditating down at Jhana Grove, it says only 1 or 2 days to go. We haven't got into deep meditation yet. So don't worry, there's always another retreat, but I'm getting old. Don't worry, there's another lifetime. Why rush when you've got so many more lifetimes ahead of you? She'll be right, mate. Take it easy. Chill out. Why are people in so much of a rush these days? When you've got many more times and opportunities. So that's one of the reasons why the characteristics of rebirth, reincarnation, they do go, time to time, go over and over and over and over. We develop slowly. It took a long time before someone like Darwin could actually convince the truth, veracity of the evolution of these beings we call animals, human beings. But we're not just a physical body. There's also a parallel evolution which goes on, the evolution of the mind, which dwells in this body. That mind evolves as well. And you can actually see there's some very highly evolved beings who are kind and generous and harmless. There are some beings which have only just evolved from the states of lower beings. People like Mr. Trump. No, I shouldn't do things like that. Get in trouble. No, that's only a joke. No one's a bad person. Maybe. But anyway, sometimes I used to think when George Bush was a president, wouldn't it be wonderful if the people in power could realize that, they're going to come back again, be reincarnated. So where would, George W. Bush be reincarnated? I reckon in Iraq. Well, anyway, if you have to come back again, you have to take much better care of this planet. But if you think, I'm out of here soon, doesn't really matter, of course you don't look after this more. So I always think that, if people could accept, and it's pretty easy to prove, the truth of rebirth, reincarnation, then they take much better, different attitude. They take the big picture, the long picture. Having to come back again, you make sure there's something good to come back to. Something wonderful to come back to. And the other thing is, we'd also take far better care of our elderly people. Sometimes we put people in the homes, we never go and visit them, we never look after them, we never put resources into the elderly, because we think it's a waste of limited resources. They're going to die anyway soon. But they will come back again. So if any of you have had young people who misbehave, young people who go a little bit feral, young people who become undisciplined, all it is people who were old before taking their revenge. Anyway, not everyone does that, but anyway, maybe that's the case. So by looking after elderly people, then maybe that's an investment in our future. Look at it in a different way. These are our kids in the future, in the future. Elderly people. Different perspective, but I think it's quite cool. Instead of forgetting, marginalizing, elderly, disabled, stigmatized, because what's the point? They can't contribute. My goodness, of course they can. If not in this life, in the next. So if I keep on talking, so I've gone over time, I'll be going into your next life as well. So now's the time to stop and open up for questions and answers. So I think this was sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. Any questions from the floor? Yes, you got one there. Okay. Okay, come run over. Quick. This is where Buddhists get exercise. Yes.
Thank you for a fascinating, wonderful talk tonight.
Excellent.
Yes.
Next question. It's called quitting while you're ahead.
No, I'd like to share.
Go on.
I remember lots of my past lives, and in particular, ones where I was in Japan, Japanese past lives. And in this lifetime, I'm a Reiki Japanese energy master.
Yeah.
I've done, I work with all those energies, and also I'm also connected to the Japanese Buddhism that I'm very passionate about, as well as being passionate here. But I'd like to say that there is a ship, a peace ship from Japan that's come to Australia. It was in Fremantle 2 days ago, and it's gone now travelling around Australia. They need lots of OMS, lots of support. They are here against nuclear weapons. They're connecting with ICANN, that won the Nobel Peace Prize for nuclear,
disarmament. Yeah.
Yeah, disarmament. And they're hoping that by going around, they've got someone from Hiroshima, an 88-year-old, talking about the disasters and the terrors that happened, not to happen again. So they're wanting basically for the government, Australian government, to sign the nuclear disarmament agreement. And so they need lots and lots of support and, positive energy. So I'd like to they're on the Facebook if anyone wants to find them. So thank you. Thank you for tonight. Thank you.
If any you ever go to Japan, just go into those places. I went to the museum in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they're chilling. Testimonies, photos of what this can do. And that people would actually just even contemplate that is craziness. But also, if any of you go to Cambodia, go to the killing fields. I went to an interfaith conference over there, and we were all chatting together, talking, making friends. As soon as we went into those killing fields, one of them anyway, everyone went silent. We never talked to each other until we got back into the hotel. It was just really, it moved you deeply. How people can do that to one another. So, we should remember those things, be kind and stop all this nonsense. Anyway, that's just personal. So any other questions? We've got some questions maybe from the, from the internet. Because sometimes you don't, because of this nation or that nation, make America great again, or make sort of Japan great again. It's just a world. Just on New Year's Eve, I asked a question of everybody in my little New Year's Eve party. I said, how many Asians are there? What percentage of monks at Bodhinyana Monastery are Asian? Somebody said 10%, 12%. I said, you're all wrong, 100%. We're all Asians at Bodhinyana Monastery. There is some Southeast Asians, some South Asians, some East Asians, some Australasians, some Caucasians. They shouldn't sort of, when we have me and the other, it doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, we've got some questions here. From Portugal. Should we worry about past life? Is it possible to intellectually understand these matters? I find it difficult. It does give you the big picture. So if you can recall and get serious about past lives, it also means you accept future lives as well. This is not the end of things when a person dies. And that does create a huge difference in the way we react to things like deaths. Or rather, I would say, overreact to them, as if it's the end of the world. No, it means that, this life is gone, wonderful, we had a wonderful time together, but a lot of times people meet each other again, honestly, and just not trying to make people feel good. It changes the whole idea of life and death. Right at this moment, the most important matter, a matter of life and death. It means it exceeds every other experience in its importance. And that really skews the way we look at this life. not a matter of life and death, but a matter of how you live and how you die and how you come back again. Is there any way to break the cycle of birth and rebirth and what happens when there's no rebirth to be had? That's the Buddhist enlightenment. To understand more about that, that's a deeper question, maybe just get into the YouTube and get the what's it called, the Word of the Buddha classes, the Sutta classes, which goes into more detail. From Germany, what can we do to make sure to spend the next life with our loved ones again, parents, friends and children? There was the old thing which I was taught, if you do things together, especially if you do good karma together, acts of good karma together, and you get reborn together. So I was telling that to this couple. It was a Thai lady married to an Australian, and they were about to make an offering, the food offering to the monks, doing it together. And I said, well, if you do it together, usually sort of, there's both hold the plate of food or the whatever the offering is. And they said, well, it's wonderful you do that together. Because you're doing it together, it means in your next life you'll meet each other, be man and wife again. At which point the man took his hand away very quickly. He did that. One life is enough for this lady, thank you. That's some really good anecdotes. And this is what happens in real life. There was this, if any of you go to Bodhinyana Monastery, you see we have in the pillars of the wall, that's where we actually put the ashes of people who die. It's a nice place for them. So you can just go there and there's the ashes of my husband or my kid or whatever. And so there was this, he was, I think, Malaysian Chinese, could be Singaporean Chinese. So her husband died. And so, I did the ceremony, put her ashes in the wall, the little plaque on the wall. Husband had passed away. And a few months later, she came up and she said, well, I'm really, really sick. Doctors only give me a little time to live. Can I reserve a place as well in the wall for my ashes? And I said, well, do you want to sort of be in the same pillar with your husband? She said, no way. I've been, especially underneath him all my life. If I can be above him, fine. Or even better, a long way down the wall. That's what she said. Oh, people are really fun. So, what do we do to make sure to spend the next life with our loved ones again? Maybe ask their permission first of all. Maybe you want to, but maybe they have other ideas. No, if you associate together and you harmony together and you do lots of things together, of course there's a connection there. You tend to sort of come back again in the same groups and circles again. It just happens. So that's how these things occur. So that's just a little talk about the characteristics from life to life. And a lot of times, sometimes you can recognize people. You recognize them just by their characteristics, just the way. Just I wouldn't mention that lady who was hated paying tax in her past life, hating it in this life as well. So sometimes that occurs. People who are kind in the past life, kind in this life as well. It's beautiful. So anyway, that's a little Dhamma talk today. So I've got to go back to Serpentine to carry on the retreats. I get reincarnated down there tomorrow morning. So in the meantime, we now pay respects to the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. And happy Australia Day. I'm sure we'll be here again next year.